just reminding me that AI is just a tool and it's up to us how we use it. It gave me hope that there are people out there leveraging it for good and thinking about how it can benefit not just themselves, but humanity as well.
Welcome to the Socially Conscious AI Season 1 wrap-up. This season, we've had the privilege of speaking with incredible guests working in areas like ethics, mental health, education, and the environment, each using AI to create meaningful social impact. Today, we're reflecting on the conversations, sharing our biggest takeaways, and discussing the insights that challenged and inspired us. From ethical AI and healthcare to the transformative potential of AI in sustainability and education. We're revisiting the highlights and looking ahead to what's next for socially conscious AI. So let's dive in. Valencio, how's it going?
It's going pretty well. I'm excited to kind of reflect on our season. I can't believe it's over already.
Let's start with where the show started. And specifically, what inspired you to start the Socially Conscious AI podcast, and what did you hope to achieve here in season 1?
Well, for me personally, I think the concept of socially conscious kind of actually started like in 2010, which is crazy to think that it was almost 14 years ago. I was kind of trying to take a break from advertising and wanted to dive into the world of social good, and ended up creating a blog called Socially Conscious Blog, where we deconstructed how some of these nonprofits would use the web to do a positive, scalable impact. That kind of grew into Socially Conscious Arabia because that's where I lived at the time in that region. And then, fast forward to like 2023 and like ChatGPT came online. Actually, it was online before, but it actually went mainstream. In general, the discourse, specifically around the media and people in general, like was all about AI replacing humans. And that really made me quite anxious. As someone who's working in the space, I knew that we were all trying to do the right thing. Part of what we wanted to do with socially conscious AI was like, I was curious about the landscape, wanted to learn more, and learn more about the people who were behind these projects, and just in turn, hopefully get inspired to do the same myself.
Yeah, likewise, as you said, there's a lot of AI anxiety. You hear a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And I just also felt like there had to be another narrative. Certainly, there's going to be a lot of impacts from AI, some of which will be good, some of which won't. But certainly, there's going to be a lot of great opportunities to make a good impact on the world. When you were talking about the vision for the show, talking to the people who are really using this technology to make a difference, that was absolutely irresistible. I was mostly also attracted to having cool conversations with just really interesting people doing good work. And the show, I think, has really delivered in that arena. It's been just amazing guests that have been so generous with their knowledge. We've at this point had 9 episodes prior to this one. We've talked to 9 different innovators and founders, researchers, AI ethicists. I'm curious, what themes have you noticed emerging from these conversations?
The number one thing I heard the most was like accessibility, right? And just like making AI inclusive and usable to everybody, right? Diverse populations, and just making sure that like everyone can have access to it.
Accessibility, I think, emerged as a theme. I don't know that we necessarily set out to talk about how AI would impact accessibility. But then when you realize that these especially generative AI capabilities are really useful in being able to, allow equal access to technologies to people of all different ability levels, it really has, hit close to home. It's been really exciting to hear that, AI could potentially make a more level playing field.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think another theme that I knew it was going to come up, right? Because we were focused on social good and the environment, and sustainability was one of those that I heard a few times. And not just like the environmental concerns around AI and leveraging it for making long-term ecological impacts, but also like considering the use of these models and the amount of energy that they actually consume. So on the other side of things, right?
We ended up talking quite a bit about the user experience of AI, which makes a lot of sense. We're both coming from user experience design background. And so it makes sense that that would kind of come up. But through the course of these discussions, I really seen how there's a lot more potential than just a good old fashioned chatbot kind of interface. Certainly, that's like the easiest way to get into it and kind of the primary modality. But even just in the last couple of months, we've been seeing some really exciting advancements. I think about the episode with James Veraldi, where he was talking about how they pursued that chatbot interface initially and then eventually had the realization that this was the wrong modality for what they were trying to accomplish with the scenario app.
Another thing that I heard that I think is really important is around regulation, right? And I
Mhm.
think this is something that I'm also hearing a lot in the industry, and that's a tricky one, right? But it does reflect like all these ongoing discussions and the need for oversight and rules to ensure that, you know, the work is being ethical when it comes around AI and deploying it into the mass.
We had that conversation with Kevin LaGranger, and he was talking about how important it is to regulate AI. I was maybe a little bit more on the skeptical side of that. Like, I feel like regulation can really kind of be a deterrent to innovation. But then as the season has progressed, I see that another kind of theme that comes out of this is that AI brings such a scale that we're not necessarily prepared for with our existing systems and processes. And so, that concept of letting the genie out of the bottle and it being too late before we even realize that we have a problem has really kind of changed my perspective on things. It feels like Duncan in our most recent episode also kind of echoed that. You have to start from ethical AI. You have to start from a really principled approach to things. It's not like something you can just kind of paint on at the end. Another thing we heard historically in the user experience field, right, is like you just, paint on usability at the end. You can make the user experience right at the final step of the process. No, it really needs to be baked in throughout. And so I've been really appreciative of our conversations with AI ethicists like Dai Li and Kevin LaGranger to help drive that message home for us.
I think Dai had mentioned like that it's crucial to recognize and mitigate biases in AI to ensure like fair and equitable outcomes for all users, right? Or all the like all populations, right?
And a really exciting insight that came up around that bias that's potentially in the training data that these AI models are trained on. This notion of having a, a data set that, while the AI may not be well regulated, the data is well regulated. And so there's certain private information, sensitive information that might be illegal to collect or might just be considered a bad idea to collect some of these things for fear of introducing bias. And yet, if you don't intentionally include this diverse data representing diverse people and perspectives, then you're not going to have models that really reflect the reality of the population.
And that comes into play like for example, like with Amy Brown and Authentics, right? Like where they have to achieve a certain level of HIPAA compliance, right?
Mhm,
Um, and
mhm.
so and so yeah, it's super important to be thinking about the data and the quality of the data actually.
So now there's this movement towards synthetic data, having AI generate fake data to then further train new models with, and how if there's bias baked into the original data, that will be expressed further in the synthetic data, which is then used to train a new model, so that that bias gets amplified if you're not really extremely thoughtful and careful about your approach. So I imagine this is a little bit like asking somebody which of their kids is their favorite. But nevertheless, I want to ask you: are there particular guests or episodes that really stood out to you, and what made those really resonate with you?
As someone who likes to start things up, right? I'd say innovation stood out to me, and specifically one of the quotes that Duncan mentioned, which is like innovation thrives when teams are encouraged to experiment and learn from failures. And I think that's something that's super important with AI, just being able to sandbox that before you scale it, right? And test it and refine it and work on all these principles. But at the same time, that allows you, because you're working on such a small scale and minimizing the impact it's going to have on people and testing it locally, that then it becomes easier to scale and more responsible to scale from that perspective. So that stood out to me. And then similar a similar quote that came from Lori from Nesta, right?
Mhm.
And where he's focused on foresight and how they bring together experts from various fields to allow them to foresee challenges and innovate solutions that are both effective and ethical. And I think the important thing there is that you're bringing people from multidisciplinary fields, right? And they're bringing different perspectives. And I think that's really important, especially in tech, to invite the outside world in and co create this and open our mindsets to other challenges that other people are facing. Cause sometimes we get this tunnel vision. So those are the two that's kind of the main thing that stood out to me.
Preparing for this episode, going through our previous recordings, there's just great moments in all of them. I'd say probably the ones that jump out to me in terms of maybe a surprise was like our episode with Matthew Yip talking about Bookshare at Benetech. As a parent of a neurodivergent kid who's got learning challenges, just being a part of the community of kids with learning differences, I hadn't really considered the potential impact for AI to positively improve the educational experience. As Dai pointed out during the episode with her, she has concerns about there being this new class of AI haves and have nots. There's obvious opportunities for AI to really improve the accessibility of education and the breadth of education, to customize learning to a specific student's needs. At the same time, there's concern around whether the same people who are historically underserved go on being underserved by lack of access to the technology. I really felt like that was kind of an emotional episode for me, hearing how there's this opportunity for students to get a lot more help, but then also, in the back of my mind, the concern about whether or not that opportunity would be made to everyone equally.
I personally enjoyed that episode too, talking to Matthew. It reminded me of when I worked in education in ed tech years ago. And when we would do focus groups or research and talking to the teachers and the districts and just hearing some of the impact and the positive outcomes that were coming from the work that we were doing was really inspiring. That kind of just drove me to remembering that, like, when you align a good cause and technology, right, that we can really bridge the gap for people out there. I felt really fulfilled when I was working in education.
I also really like the talk with James Veraldi. The primary topic of the episode was talking about the scenario app and using AI in mental health and coaching and well-being practices. But as a former head of strategy for TikTok, hearing some of the tea on that topic was really fascinating. Hearing about, his attempts to sound alarms about potentially toxic usage of the app, unfortunately kind of confirmed a lot of my suspicions around the social media and the approach to optimization with those things. So that was one of those things we hadn't really planned for, but really ended up being a great surprise in the episode.
Were there any lessons that you took away from any of the guests?
I'd say a big one that jumped out to me was during the discussion with Duncan Mundell. Again, we hadn't really planned on talking about like the business of AI so much, but when he started talking about this different approach, I've done a lot of innovation work with startups, and the lean startup advice is get out of the building. Like the answers are not inside the building. That basically just means, take a customer focus, really get closely involved with your customers, find out what they actually need. But again, going to that issue of scale, as Duncan was pointing out, a lot of these companies are trying so hard to leverage this big tool of AI to address their biggest problems, biggest concerns. And that if you don't already have pretty solid AI chops, if you don't really know how to do it and do it right, that could be a mistake. And so that there's this really great opportunity to focus inside the building to find a problem we're solving just for your own, company, business, organization. Then you can get more and more ambitious. But if you just try to go all in on your biggest problem with an untested technology or solution, maybe with a team that doesn't really have the experience necessary, that's basically a recipe for failure. And so I wasn't expecting that business lesson embedded in the episode, but that was a lot of fun for me.
That's also part of what drives this hype cycle and
Mhm.
like kind of inflates the actual outcomes that could possibly be possible with AI, right? But then it also sets the bar so high, right, versus the reality, and it's hard to ground yourself in where you should be focusing on versus where you're trying to go, right? And sometimes the end goal isn't always the right place to be focused on. It's important to get to the ground, build your chops, like you were saying, and go from there. One of the things that I learned from that, though, from a user experience perspective, right, we tend to focus like human centered design. And what that essentially means is that you're focused on a particular person or persona or demographic for who you're actually building these applications out for, right? And so that helps give a good perspective on what the right things to be solving for. By focusing on human needs and experiences, we can create AI solutions that truly serve and empower individuals.
Mm.
And one of the things going through this season has just kind of even expanded that beyond just human centered. Like now the conversation is around humanity centered design, right? So like going broader and thinking about the bigger societal impacts and starting to solve those type of problems and just creating like solutions that address like systemic problems, societal problems, and like bringing in that like broader communities, bringing in diverse perspectives, and just looking for solutions that are a bit more holistic. I think that's another thing too, like with AI, because of the impact that it could make. It's important to like widen our aperture sometimes, right?
Was there anything about this season that, changed your mind or that you have a different understanding than you started with?
Not necessarily changed my mind, but kind of reinforced my perspective, right? And this was more to do with regulation and oversight and the debate over how much regulation is appropriate is always going to be contentious in the field. Um, when I think about this, it's like as a creative, I need a bounding box in order to operate and be creative within. And it's important to set those bounding boxes, right? And that bounding box almost needs to be defined first.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so that's one of those things where it just reminded me when you're starting off or when you're thinking about things, right? It would be nice to have this bounding box, not just at the government level. I think that's important, right? To create a common bounding box, but then also for specific industries to be able to do the same thing. The bounding box is going to look different for education and healthcare versus the environment versus um, something else, right?
Mhm, mhm.
What about yourself? Did anything like kind of shift your mind on anything?
My attitude towards regulation in the AI space have historically had kind of a dim view of regulation just because regulations tend to be, written, particularly when it's law, not just, regulation, tends to be written by people who aren't the experts in the subject matter. And so kind of felt like having Congress get together and pass a bunch of AI laws, if they don't really understand the stuff, then that really isn't a great fit. But like I said, over the course of the season, my attitude has shifted a bit towards it is necessary and important. I still don't know that Congress are the right people to write legislation on this stuff, but at least we're more aware of the need.
There is already a global ethics framework that exists that most of us in the space do know
Mhm.
of. That's kind of where I was thinking is a good foundation that should be scaled. But then also, to your point, the people making these laws almost need to co create, like kind of going back to that humanity centered design, right? And co create these regulations with the people who actually know about them, right? The people who are
Yeah,
working in the industries and bringing diverse perspectives. And so the process around that, I think, is the most important part. Like
yeah,
how do they get there, right? And how do they iterate on that and keeping themselves flexible? Because I think in my mind, sometimes laws feel a bit rigid, right?
yeah, yeah.
And we're almost entering a new era, right? Like where laws have to be kind of agile.
Another thing that I've kind of evolved my thinking on, even though it wasn't necessarily part of our episodes here in season one, was that when we started season one, my overall opinion of AI, specifically Gen AI, has been fairly dim. Like, if you understand how an LLM works, you realize that at its core, It's just kind of predicting the next word, it's predicting the next phrase based off of probabilities, right? And so, given that kind of mindset and understanding, I've kind of felt like the AI, it is overhyped. That was one of the reasons I was excited to talk to Kevin LaGranger, is talking about the AI hype cycle. But throughout the course of this season, I've also seen really big advancements in these Gen AI LLM models' ability to do more reasoning and start to move in the direction of actually being able to do things rather than just plop out a big blob of text, regardless of how good that might be. It was still just text. I'm the one who has to do all the work, whether images or creating music, whatever. It was all very much just like, here's a thing, good luck. Throughout the course of this season, I've seen a lot of advancements in that area, but that's been a really, by my perspective, rapid evolution of the state of AI just in the last few months. I think we've been at this like 6 months, and it's changed a lot. So as we look forward to season two, are there any specific topics or guests or features that you'd like to approach next?
One of my favorite metaphors, right, around technology, um, that both Kevin and Duncan had mentioned, which is like technology can be leveraged as a tool or a weapon, right?
Mhm.
Like a knife can be used to stab someone, or it could be used to spread butter, right? And so I think like just thinking about that and the way that technology is going, I think for season two, I think one of the areas that I really would love to focus on a little bit more is like around the real world impact of technology. Maybe talking to some community leaders or environmental advocates and getting their perspective on like, how it's currently impacting some of their communities, right? But at the same time, like where do they want it to go, or how can it actually help them? Opening the aperture to be able to maybe co-think around some of this stuff, I think would be really cool. Selfishly speaking, because I work in the space, which is just like human to AI collaboration in the workplace, right?
Mm.
Like, how is AI augmenting our capabilities within their jobs? And see if there's anyone successfully doing that out there, right? Creating these hybrid workflows, and what is both the positive and the negative impacts of some of that stuff, right? And just how's that measured? I think just having lived in the Middle East and having a background from other countries, right? Just like what AI looks like in emerging markets.
Mm.
So like just highlighting stories from other regions beyond just where we live in North America, like Africa or South America or even Asia, where it's probably like enabling some unique innovation just because of the conditions that are different elsewhere, right? So that creates different opportunities and different applications.
Yeah, I think that's a great opportunity of area to explore for the show is in emerging markets where a lot of people may not even have smartphones. I mean, that's how most of us are going to be accessing AI most frequently. So if you don't even have a smartphone, I have heard about a couple of interesting projects where basically the AI services are running in the cloud, and then the user could access it from something as simple as an SMS message. And so that's a pretty exciting area to dig into to see how, again, how can we make sure that everybody benefits from this AI revolution and not just a few?
Absolutely. Anything specific you're looking to forward to for season two?
Yeah, one thing that's been on my mind is that the vision of the show has been to highlight reasons to be optimistic about AI, that it's not all doom and gloom, and that there are some great people doing great stuff using the technology, and that there's a lot of opportunity for that to make positive impact on the world. I think that has perhaps steered us away from discussions of the negatives of AI. And I think any show that's about reasons to be optimistic about AI probably also needs to address some of those concerns. So I think in season two, I will try to make a little more room to also talk about what are the risks, what are the impacts, what are the issues that we're already seeing, and potentially trying to bring in the experts who can talk about what to do about it, how we can actually maybe avoid some disasters as we introduce this technology that has such an unprecedented scale.
It just goes back to like just reminding me that AI is just a tool and it's up to us how we use it. It gave me hope that there are people out there leveraging it for good and thinking about how it can benefit not just themselves, but humanity as well. In turn, it's inspired me to focus on doing the same, and hopefully it's done the same for people who are out there listening to us.
And of course, we'd love to implement more of our audience feedback. So, if you're watching the show on YouTube, leaving comments could be a great way to help us know what you'd like to hear more about. If you're listening on Spotify, we'll be running more of our surveys. Plus, you can always leave comments on Spotify as well. We'd really love to hear more about what you'd like to hear about. As an example, I got some audience feedback just last weekend from somebody who was saying that we want to make the show accessible to a non-technical audience. Our goal is not to be engineering heavy or super technical. And I got the feedback that maybe we haven't necessarily fully explained a lot of the concepts that we're talking about. So for season 2, I'd love to do some episodes where we just dig into some of the fundamentals, really try to make it a little bit more accessible. Like, how does this technology work? What's it really doing? So that, people are able to follow the conversation a little bit better than maybe what's been going for before.
Yeah, absolutely. And just in general, I just want to say thank you to all the guests who came onto our show and supported us on the season. They followed through and appreciate their time. And then everyone who's taking the time out of their day to listen to us, we appreciate the support.
Yeah, it's really humbling to know that people are taking the time to listen to us and sharing this whole wonderful revolution of AI.
And with that, I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us on our wrap-up of Socially Conscious AI Podcast Season 1. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Why not share this episode with someone who could benefit from this conversation? For Roman Bercot, I'm Valencio Cardoso. Until next season, stay curious and stay conscious.